Hey, everybody, it's your briefing attorney, Jeremy Rosenthal. I wanted to share with you this interview we did last July of 2024 with LiveNOW from Fox. We discuss and break down the U.S. Supreme Court's immunity ruling with respect to Donald Trump. Now, originally, this ruling was specific to Donald Trump's prosecution in the January 6th prosecutions by Jack Smith. Now that Donald Trump is back in the White House, the question is, what role does this immunity opinion play in a practical sense? And let me give you a specific scenario, and you can go ahead and discuss in the comments. Let's say, for argument's sake, a federal judge holds one of Donald Trump's people, staff members, Justice Department members in contempt for, say, violating a court order. Can Trump then pardon them? And if so, what's the recourse? Is there any legal recourse? Is the only remedy that's available at that point impeachment? Go ahead and discuss. It's a nerdy conversation. I understand that, but that's sort of what we do here. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the interview.
Good morning, Gina.
So if you can first break down what this ruling means for those that don't really understand that jargon.
Well, there's the opinion is 45 pages or so. It's very clear. It's all in the opinion for anybody who just wants to read it. If we want the Reader's Digest version, the short version, very simple. There are three categories of presidential immunity, according to the Supreme Court. Absolute immunity for core functions of the executive. There is no immunity for things that are outside the scope of the president's job. And then there's a really muddy middle ground where the court characterized it as things in the outer perimeter of his authority, which are presumptively immune, but may not necessarily be. So the best way I think I can the best way I think I can sort of paraphrase this is probably like this. James Bond has a license to kill. If he is killing the leader of Spectre, he's fine. If he's killing the Russian agent who he's on the same in the same movie, he's fine. If he's killing the guy from underneath the ocean who's trying to start World War III, he's fine. If James Bond decides he's going to use his license to kill his ex-wife because he's tired of alimony, he's not fine. So those are essentially the categories of the immunity. And now it's for the lower court to try to decipher it, to try to figure out what it is. So the Supreme Court took this case, sent it back to the trial court so they can do some further analysis on it.
Jeremy, only you could find a James Bond connection there. Thank you for breaking that down, though. For those that don't really understand, you found that correlation there. So looking ahead, as it relates to presidential immunity and a lot of controversy surrounding this, how will this impact presidents to come? How does this impact former President Donald Trump?
First off, let's talk about Donald Trump and this prosecution.
Okay.
Think of the Supreme Court as the instant replay booth in a football game. And think of the trial judge, Judge Chutkin in D.C. She's the field referee. The field referee gets to make all the calls on the field, and a lot of those calls can't be reviewed by the booth. Basically, what has happened is the booth replay has said, okay, we need to replay second down. We're going to take this issue and we're going to give it back to the trial court, and the trial court, you replay second down. If you need to bring it back up here, we're here. In essence, it's going to be a big delay because there's all this muddy middle ground that they now have to sort of fight through with this presumptive immunity. So that's for the short term. It's going to delay Donald Trump's trial, as you said, almost certainly until after the election. And it may not even rule out another trip back to the Supreme Court before this case gets to trial. For future presidents, insert the name of any politician that you love or that you hate into this opinion as a president, because they're going to get the benefits, if you will, and the downside, if any, of this opinion, because essentially the Supreme Court virtually never rules on these types of separation of power issues. We talked about it yesterday, that Marbury versus Madison was the very first separation of powers case, and that was over 200 years ago. We don't visit this topic very much. So the next president, the president after that, and the president after that now have essentially a roadmap, if you will, of what's in bounds, what's out of bounds. And to make another thing, another way to sort of look at it and really bring it home, especially to Mr. Trump, the January 6th things are in this muddy area because he was the president of the United States. If we take a look at the New York trial that he just sat for, the payments to Stormy Daniels, even if he did that after he was in the Oval Office, and there were some acts that were alleged after he was president, those aren't going to be the core responsibilities of the president, right? We didn't elect Donald Trump president of the United States so he could make payments to Stormy Daniels. And even if he did make payments that were, regardless of what people think of the payments, legitimate or illegitimate, it just wasn't part of his core responsibilities. So that's kind of the idea here.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Jeremy. And it poses the question, as it relates to the president with this broad immunity, what about those that are in close relation to the president when things happen? So maybe those on his staff that help make decisions that, could relate to a certain thing. What about other legislators that are working closely with him? How does this correlate with them?
That's an excellent point. And I do think that if we see this anywhere, that's where we're going to see it, right? Mm-hmm. I think that it seems like every other administration, there's a staffer who gets in trouble for doing something that they might not be able to do, but they're part of the executive branch as well. So if you have, for instance, somebody an attorney for the White House. Or if you have somebody, the chief of staff of the White House, who is talking to the Justice Department and saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is that person going to be entitled to that executive immunity? I think that's what the president, and I think that's what that person argues if they're in trouble going forward. So I do think that really anybody in the executive branch is going to at least make a play for this type of immunity going forward. And the courts may come back and say, no, not you. The courts may come back and say that ultimately, but I think that's the next logical step.
Makes sense. And, with that, there's concern that maybe since the president can't be found guilty of something, maybe those close to him will, it'll fall on them. So another point that you're making there. Jeremy, always a pleasure having you for these breaking news alerts. We appreciate your candidness, your expertise, and your perspective. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we let you go?
This story, even though the opinion's been out for a day, it's going to take some time for this thing to really marinate. Short term, that this was I think a strategic, at least, victory for Donald Trump and his team. I'm sure that they're happy to have this thing delayed. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's completely off the hook for these January 6th cases. But again, we have to view these things exactly like you said. It's not about this year and this election. It's about the next 100 years and what the executive can do and what they can't do and where those boundaries and rules are.
Jeremy, truly a pleasure. Thank you again for joining us to break all of this down for the viewers. You enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.